Hello everyone, welcome back to Questing Beast. Today I'm going to be doing a overview/review and my impressions of basic D&D, which is the new product put out by Wizards for Dungeons & Dragons. As you may know, 5th edition has just started becoming released. They just put out this section of the rules. It's a free PDF. You can go to the Wizards website and download it for free. It covers everything you need to know to play Dungeons & Dragons up through level 20 with 4 basic classes. It has all the essential rules that you'll need to know. This will be my more in-depth, longer review. I'll probably be doing a shorter overview video as well that I'll probably post on Dawnforgecast. So you can check that out as well if you don't want to see the whole long bit-by-bit review that I'll be doing right here. So let's get right into it. As I said, it's a free DVD. You can pick it up for free, and you can go through it as well. I recommend that you do. There's a lot of really nice changes that they've made. I should point out right away that I'm coming at this game as someone who has not played 4th edition, and strictly speaking hasn't played 3.5 either. I'm coming at it from a Pathfinder perspective. I've played Pathfinder for about a year now as a player, so I'll be looking at this from that perspective. Changes that they've made since then, and my impressions on how other role-playing games have likely influenced this as well. So, D&D basic rules. One funny thing you can see right down here. Disclaimer: Wizards of the Coast is not responsible for the consequences of splitting up the party, sticking appendages in the mouth of a leering green devilface, accepting a dinner invitation from bugbears, storming the feast hall of a hill giant's steading, angering a dragon of any variety, or saying yes when the DM asks, "Are you really sure?" That's pretty funny. One thing I like to point out right away is that the design of this is just fantastic. There's a lot of attention that's been paid to color, to typography, to page layout. It's very easy to read, and the rules pull you right in. In the basic D&D edition, there's no illustrations. It's just the rules. It's very compact, very straightforward, very well written. I can tell a lot of attention has been put into that. So we start out immediately with an introduction. What is a role-playing game? It's essentially what you'd expect. Not a whole lot there. Using these rules, so it's broken down into 3 parts. The first part is creating a character. Then the basic rules on how to play, and finally how to deal with magic. I'm very appreciative of the fact that this section, part 1, walks you through character creation, step by step. Something I noticed in the Pathfinder book is that although it does have a section on character creation, what you need to know to create your character is scattered around the book. Leveling up is kind of confusing. It's hard to know what to do when you gain levels. It's not organized in a very streamlined fashion, and they've definitely done this here. I can't speak for the player's handbook, which isn't out yet, but at least in basic D&D, I think they've done a good job with that. How to play: DM describes the environment, the players describe what they do, and then DM narrates the results. That's what you'd expect. Game dice. If you've played Pathfinder, that's not a huge change. The standard collection of gamers' dice. The D20, so it's still basically a D20 system. You're going to roll a d20, add your modifiers, and then try and hit a target number. Pretty standard. One big change here is advantage and disadvantage. This is a very nice system. I like it a lot. I think it's very elegant. It's very straightforward. It's easy to remember. And that sometimes you'll have a situation where you will be given advantage or disadvantage. This can happen for all sorts of different reasons. And of course, the GM can make their own calls as well. But instead of having lots of different rules for this, so in this situation you get a +2, or in this situation you get a +4 or a +3, and you have to keep track of all of it, instead you either have disadvantage or disadvantage. Those are the 2 options that you have. If you have advantage, then you roll 2 d20s instead of 1, and you pick the one that's higher, and you use that score. Disadvantage is the reverse of that. Roll 2 d20s, and you have to go with the lower one. It's easy to remember, it's flavorful, you get to roll extra dice. I like it. Specific beats general, round down, goes through basic adventures. I like that they brought this out right at the beginning, the 3 pillars of adventure. That Dungeons & Dragons revolves around exploration, social interaction, and combat. They even put combat last as the three of these things. I think a big change that they're making from 5th edition, coming away from 4th, I haven't played 4th, but from what I understand is very combat focused, is that they're really trying to bring back the sense of exploring a world and doing more than just getting into combat situations. So exploration and social interaction are definitely emphasized a lot more in this game. You'll see that later in the mechanics as well. A lot of the combat mechanics have been greatly simplified. There's still depth to them, there's still strategy, but it is no longer this extremely detailed, crunchy system, not nearly as much as it used to be. And that's just to streamline everything, bring all of the different rules for exploration, social interaction, and combat under a more consistent rule set that works together and makes sense. So I'm glad to see those things back. One thing that I've noticed reading through basic D&D is that there is a much greater emphasis on the role of the GM. Of course, this has always been true in Dungeons & Dragons games, but in this case, it's hard to put your finger on it. There's just a lot more calls that the GM makes, where the rules would just say the GM decides if this is the case or not. The game assumes that the GM will probably be house ruling a lot of these rules. There's a lot of segments of the basic rules that are optional. For example, multi-classing or even using feats is optional. Your game master can decide just not to use them. The game will still work. It assumes that the game master will be creating their own worlds for the most part. There's just a lot of reliance on the intelligence and the common sense of a game master to run the game in the way that's best for the players. There's a lot less of an emphasis on, here's the rules, here is the bonus you add, you better do that or the game will be broken. It's, I don't know, I like it a lot more. It's how people play these games anyway. You rely on your GM to make a good call. Step by step, creating a character, one step at a time. You still have your basic things in place. You have choosing a race, you have choosing a class, you still have experience points. All these things are pretty much the same. Let's see, some changes that we have here. Hit points and hit dice, still basically the same. Your characters have hit dice, you roll them. When you level up, add your constitution modifier, and that's what your new hit points look like. A big change is right here, proficiency bonuses. Proficiency bonus is a bonus that influences your whole character sheet, your whole character. So your character will start out with a proficiency bonus of +2. It's just a bonus that you add to anything that you are good at. All right? So, for example, you can have a proficiency in your different saving throws. You can have a proficiency in different weapons, of course. You can have a proficiency in different skills. And all that happens is that if you're proficient in it, you add your proficiency bonus. That's it. You add your +2. The bonus goes up by +1 every 4 levels that you gain. So by the time you're levels 16 through 20, or 17 through 20, you're going to have a +6 proficiency bonus. So you'll use this for combat rolls, you'll use this for skill checks, you'll use this for all sorts of different things. It applies to lots of stuff. It streamlines a lot of things. Now, something I did notice, and I thought was interesting at first, was that it only goes up to +6. So by the time you're up at a legendary level of 17 through 20, you're only getting a +4 compared to being at level 1, which seems like, that doesn't seem like much at all. Like, what happened to the massive epic feel of being a legendary character? And from what I've seen, it looks like 5th edition is really scaling that down. The bonuses you get in general are much smaller. So having a proficiency bonus of +6 instead of +2 is a pretty big difference, because everything has been scaled down just to avoid a lot of the bonus bloat that you would get, where you have bonuses coming from everywhere, and you'll be adding 19 to different rolls or 30 to different rolls, and it just became a mess. And they're trying to scale everything back so that it's much easier to do the math, and everything's much quicker. Also, by putting everything under the proficiency bonus heading, you've just simplified a lot of the math, and you've simplified how your character levels up. When your character gets up to level 5, I suppose, and they get a +3, now you just remember, I add a +3 to all the things I'm good at. This affects skills as well. So unlike in 3.5 or Pathfinder, where you have your different skills, and you you level them all up individually, you can add more ranks to them, and so you're going to have one skill at 11, and one skill at 4, and one skill at etc. In this, you are either proficient in a skill or you aren't. All right. If you're proficient in the skill, you add your bonus. If you're not, then you just use your ability modifier. So there's a lot less detail in the customization of your skills, but with the benefit of streamlining the whole process. So up here we have our ability scores. Basically the same deal, the same group of ability scores. You can do it by an array, you can do it through rolling, you can do it through point buy. They mention all of those. Ability score summaries, racial increases from the different races, describe your character. This is really interesting. I like this a lot. I'll get more into this when we get to this part in the character building, but they mention it here, so I'll mention it. Your character now has a number of things that used to be just flavor text, but now are much more important. So you have an alignment, which we've always had, but you also now have an ideal, which is something that you strive for. You have bonds, a connection to something in the fantasy world that you're playing in. You have a flaw, an actual problem with your character, a downside, and you have things like backgrounds. Now, originally, when you make a D&D character, oftentimes people would write these things out as part of their character background. But it was flavor text, right? It doesn't actually affect the rules. It doesn't really make any difference in the game. You can make it make a difference if you want to role play that out, but as far as the rules went, it made no difference at all. And plenty of people just didn't write character backgrounds. But now these things are important, and they actually have a degree of mechanical effect in the game. And this is a wonderful improvement, and it really shows that the D&D, the people who are writing this new edition of the game, are focusing much more on role-playing and on integrating your character into the world and bringing their flaws and their character traits to the forefront. So I'm very gratified to see that they've added that. We have your character abilities. Choose your equipment. You're going to have your armor class. Works essentially the same way. It's mostly based off your dexterity modifier plus bonuses from whatever armor you're wearing. Straightforward. You can have your weapons. Ability scores work the same way as before, where at scores 10 through 11 is 0, and then 12 through 13 is +1, 14 through 15 is +2, etc. So it works the same way as it's always worked, essentially. I'm a little disappointed by that. I understand why they did it. People are used to that system. I don't understand, coming as someone who's had some background in other role-playing games, I don't understand why you have a score and then you have to derive a modifier from it. I don't understand why you can't just have the modifiers instead of having this sort of dual system. I understand it's tradition and that they're just going with it. I'm okay with that. But it seems a little clunky and something that they could have revised. But I'm not going to complain. Talks about your levels. You have your basic tiers of play, 1 through 4, 5 through 10, 11 through 16, and 17 through 20 are roughly define the 4 levels of play, the major steps that you would go up where your character sort of moves to a new level and is able to engage in the world at a new level. As you can see here, the proficiency bonuses go up by +1 every 4 levels in a consistent manner. You're choosing your race. Now the basic D&D, this edition of the game, or this, basic 5th edition, comes with just, let's see, I think only 3 races in the 4 classes? No, 4 races, humans, elves, dwarves, and halflings. And then it comes with the 4 standard classes as well, spiders, clerics, wizards, and rogues. So that's enough to get you started. All the additional detail will be added in the Player's Handbook when that comes out in a month or 2. What's interesting is that as the core rulebooks come out, they're going to be updating this free document with information from those handbooks, from those core books, so that the basic D&D, which will always be free, a free PDF that you can download at any time, will be growing and will be expanding and will eventually include all of the important information from all of the core rulebooks that will be essential to play. So this will be a great resource for new players. Players haven't never gotten into a role-playing game, never played Dungeons and Dragons. They can download this and jump straight into it without spending a dime. And then if it's something they love, they'll be encouraged to buy the core books to get even more depth of information, more details, more options. But you can play an entire game, an entire campaign, just using this edition. All right, we're choosing a race. We have our dwarves. There's a lot of flavor text in here. It goes in depth into like what dwarves are like, what their personalities are like, what their social structure is like. Quite a lot of flavor text. We get into some actual mechanics here, but I like that they really try and flesh out the world and make your character seem much more real and not just stat blocks. I appreciate that. Number of names, clan names. We have some sub-races of dwarves. We have hill dwarves and mountain dwarves. And I'm sure there'll be more in the player's handbook. They just give you a couple options here. Elves, halflings, and humans. One interesting thing is that humans, let's see here, come with a whole bunch of sub-races, or ethnicities, I suppose they're called. Come with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different sub-races. And these don't have any mechanical effect as far as I can tell, but they really do flesh out your culture and make you feel like you're really making your character more specific by choosing a particular culture. Now what humans do, humans' main bonus, if I can find it here, is that they add +1 to all, here we go, ability score increase. 2 different ability scores of your choice increase by 1. Oh, that's a variant human trait. No, I'm not sure where it went. I'm not sure. Oh, duh, it's right here. I don't know why I missed that. Yeah, all right, it's right here. All of your ability scores, all 6 of your ability scores increase by 1. That's a huge bonus, right? Compared to things like in Pathfinder. But it's offset by the fact that humans get very little special abilities, right? They're pretty much vanilla otherwise. Your age is less than the other races, but your alignment can be anything you want. Size is normal. Speed is normal. Couple languages, right? Whereas, for example, halflings, your dexterity score is increased by 2, but you have a whole bunch of interesting things. Right? So you have advantages on saving throws against being frightened. Right? So we talked about advantage before. If you're frightened, you would roll 2d20 to resist that instead of 1. Nimbleness, languages, sub-races, they're lucky. So you would choose one of these non-human races to get a lot of their flavorful abilities. And humans are more straightforward, and they sort of get an across-the-board bonus, but less special traits. All right, we have our classes. Our standard 4 classes. They work basically like you would expect. We have our standard chart for when we level up, how many spell slots we get. We still have spell slots, so you have a certain number of slots, and that you can cast per day. Wizards have to add books to your spell book, and they all have to prepare spells every day. It's basically like 3rd edition. There's a lot of, they gain abilities regularly. There's only a couple levels where they don't gain an ability of some sort, or they don't get a substantial improvement. And those sort of dead levels tend to be the ones where they move up to another spell slot level, it looks like. Well, not always. But anyway, there's a lot of abilities, there's not really any dead levels, and so you're always doing something fun every time you level up. One thing I've noticed reading through these is that the classes seem to be very flavorful. They put a lot of thought into making the classes feel really like their classes. You have a particular role, but it's not like what I've heard about in 4th edition where like you're trapped in your role. Your roles, what you do is sort of flows organically from your stats. You have a lot of options, things that you can do, especially once the player handbook comes out, the player's guide comes out. But the cleric's really going to feel like a cleric. You're always going to be gaining new cleric-y things to do. You're not going to have to just go it alone in terms of making your character feel it's hard to put into words. It feels very flavorful. You have new divine domains. You've got a fighter. Fighters get your typical fighter abilities. You choose a fighting style. That's neat. You get a second wind, an action surge. I'll talk about combat later. Combat has definitely been simplified. I'll get to that once we get to that section of the book. As we can see in the fighter, for example, when they level up, they get a new fun thing, either an ability score improvement, an extra attack, martial archetype feature. Yeah, more martial archetypes here in the player's handbook. Extra attacks, indomitable. They get new abilities and interesting improvements every single level. And the levels where that doesn't happen in cleric is because they're just getting more spells. Here we have some martial archetypes. Lots of customization. Your characters can always do interesting things. We've got a rogue. Again, interesting things happening every level. Sneak attacks going up quite regularly. And we have our wizard. We have arcane traditions now. I think you can specialize in different schools, so they only mention one here. All right, personality and background. So as I mentioned before, the game puts a much more emphasis in spending time creating a background and personality for your character. One interesting change is that they go out of their way to point out the fact that your character doesn't even have to be binary gendered. You can be one character and act as another gendered character. They go out of their way to make sure that you don't feel like you're restricted by that. Though of course, you were never restricted by this in any of the editions, but they go out of their way to point that out. You go through the alignments. All right, here's a big point right here. Personality traits, ideals, bonds, flaws, etc. You ask, what's the point of these? Isn't this just like in the previous editions where you make a background but it doesn't matter? Well, here's where it matters. Inspiration. So in 5th edition, once you start role-playing your flaws, your ideals, and your bonds, you actually bring them out in a way that affects the game. If the game master sees that you are playing your character to the hilt, you are letting your flaws actually be flaws and hurting you. You're giving up things to strive for your ideals. You are actually dedicated to your bonds. If a great moment like that comes up, he can grant you inspiration. You either have inspiration or you don't have it. So when you have inspiration, you just mark that I have inspiration. And then once you take an action that corresponds to your flaws, ideals, bonds, or personality traits, then you can get advantage. And then it goes away. And then if you have another great moment of role-playing where these elements are brought out, you can gain inspiration again. So this is a mechanical reward for role-playing your character's personality, including their flaws. This is a huge improvement. It's something that a lot of modern RPGs have been doing for years now. And D&D, in my opinion, badly needed to implement something like this. And I'm very glad that they did, because this shows real dedication to emphasizing role-playing in Dungeons & Dragons and not just combat, by making mechanical effects that come from role-playing. We have our backgrounds, lots of backgrounds you can choose from. They give you charts that you can roll from if you want, though of course you make up your own to create random personality traits, ideals, bonds, and flaws. Criminals. Lots of inspiration in here to create character archetypes that you may not have thought of. And just for players who are new to role-playing, when you just give them a character sheet and you say, make a character, and they feel, okay, I can combine a class and a race, but then they're stuck with a class and a race, and it feels very vanilla. This edition, despite the fact that it's just basic version, really takes its time and really stresses that you should make characters that feel unique, that have histories, that have that are integrated into the world and that like exist for things other than combat essentially. And they give you lots of inspiration on ways that you can do that. So that if you're a new player, by the time you've gone through this whole process, you have a character that feels very fleshed out, very real. Sages, soldiers, equipment. Not a whole lot interesting here. It's what you'd expect. It's a pretty detailed equipment chapter. It's everything that you're going to need. Mounts and vehicles. You can have different kits, different kinds of toolkits to do different types of jobs. Trade goods, expenses. Oh, here's another thing I really liked. Lifestyle expenses. Let's go to the next page. So, in previous editions, players would play this differently, of course, but you would accumulate gold and then you'd have to spend it on everything, right? On meals, on rooms to sleep in, on odds and ends. And it became a bit of a bookkeeping thing. A lot of players just ignored this entirely, but it was there, and if you felt like you wanted to play the rules as written, it became just a very detailed process that didn't really feel like role-playing, having to track your money and track all of your expenses. So what they did is they streamlined this. They made it simple, easy to remember, but also very flavorful by creating the lifestyles. So we have wretched, squalid, poor, modest, comfortable, wealthy, and aristocratic. So all that happens is that at set intervals, say every week or every month, the game master will say, all right, it's been a week or it's been a month, it's time for us to pay our lifestyle expenses. And then we simply pay amount of money based on the level of lifestyle that we decide we want to live at. So for example, I say, oh, that last dungeon haul gave me quite a lot of loot, and I'm going to spend 4 gold per day, so you calculate how long it's been, you pay that much gold, in order to live at a wealthy level. So what this means is that the game master can say, okay, so you have enough money to live at a wealthy level over the next month, and that means that new opportunities are going to open up for you, new role-playing and story opportunities. You're going to be able to meet new people in the wealthy class. You're going to be able to move in a new level of society. People are going to treat you different because you're now living at a higher class. People can see that in the way you carry yourself and the way that you're dressed. And the same goes for these lower ones. If you're just a very poor character and the next month you can no longer afford to be wealthy, you may only be able to afford to live in squalid conditions. And now you've fallen to a lower state in life, and that will affect how people treat you. So it's a great way to simplify this whole process and still keep up the sense that you need to pay to live in a world like this, but we're taking out a lot of the nitpickiness. That's great. Services, trinkets. Oh, this is a lot of fun. So this is trinkets. You can roll a percentile die and just generate random little items that your character starts out with. It's flavorful. It reminds me of the oddities in games like Numenera, which have a system similar to this. Customization options. All right, so here's a big thing, multi-classing. You can multi-class just like in 3.5, but multi-classing works essentially the same way. Whenever you take a new level, instead of taking a level in your current class, you can take a level in another class. It doesn't go into it too much, a little bit more detail in the player's handbook, but it points out that you can do this. The proficiency bonus goes up at regular intervals. So we have feats. There are no feats mentioned in the basic DnD in this document. Feats are explicitly optional. So that means whenever you have a level at which you get a ability score advancement, instead of taking that, you can take a feat. And that's only if feats are allowed as an optional thing by your GM. I like this a lot. I assume most GMs will add feats because it adds another level of customization. But it forces you to make hard choices. And that's a hallmark of a good game, is being forced to make hard choices. An ability score increase is, of course, a big deal, but I assume the feats are going to be fairly substantial to compensate for that. This is also going to really cut down on the massive number of feats that we see in games like Pathfinder, where you get a level and, oh, I get a new feat because I gained a level. All right, which feat do I choose from? Well, there's like 300 feats you have to go through, and you have to figure out which ones are qualified for. And for a new player, that is just, it's overwhelming, that whole system. So this creates much less of this power gaming feat system, and it makes them more like these optional add-ins that add new abilities, a lot more flavor to your character, but you don't have to take them, and you can just go for straight an ability increase instead. I think that's a wise decision on their part. Using the ability scores, things work like you expect. Advantage, disadvantage, it goes through that again. Proficiency bonuses. We have your ability checks. Contests work the same. You both make a roll and try and beat each other. We have your skills. Skills are still tied to your different abilities, and they get the modifier that the abilities have. And then that's increased by the proficiency bonus if you are proficient in that skill. We have skills with different abilities. So this is really nice. This is something that some GMs may be doing already, but it's something that I've seen in other role-playing games like Legend of the Five Rings, for example, where most skills are, go back for a second, are tied to a particular attribute or to a particular ability, but they don't have to be. The game master can make judgment calls and say to himself, for example, you're trying to swim out. The example they give here is that you're trying to swim out very far, and normally that would be an athletics check, which is tied to strength. But if it's an endurance, you may roll your athletics plus your constitution instead. So you can combine skills with different abilities. We also have passive checks, which is a nice shortcut. And that's essentially just taking the average roll, they just set it at 10, plus all modifiers for a skill. This is normally used in perception, for example. So you have a passive perception that you just write on your character sheet. And that just tells you what your perception is going to be on average. That way you don't have to roll it constantly. The GM doesn't have to say, make another perception check, make another perception check, every scene that goes by to see if you notice something. Instead, you just know what your passive perception is, and then if it's high enough to notice something, you notice it, and if not, you don't. It just speeds up the whole process. Working together, so if two characters work together on the same problem, if they help each other, then you get advantage. Group checks. Using each ability, not too much of a change there. Strength is for lifting and carrying. Dexterity is for being agile. Yada, yada, yada. Saving throws. Here's another big change. Saving throws, you now have 6 saving throws instead of 3. Saving throws are now just straight up tied to your 6 abilities. So you're going to have a strength saving throw and a constitution saving throw and an intelligence saving throw, etc. And you are allowed to be proficient in different saving throws. So you get your proficiency bonus and you add it to that saving throw. This is much more intuitive, much more straightforward than the previous system. It's intuitive. It makes sense. It's what you would normally expect to happen when you're making a sort of reactionary save against something that's happened to you. I think that was a smart decision on their part. So we have adventuring. Time can happen in different increments, all the way down to rounds, movement. Not a whole lot of big rule changes here. Stealth has to do with the passive perception. So a lot of times if your enemies aren't looking for you, the Game Master will just compare your stealth rating to their passive perception. So it stops you from rolling and re-rolling over and over to see if they finally see you. You know what your scores are, you just compare them. Let's see here. Social interaction. Now, unfortunately, I guess this is to be expected, but they didn't really add a whole lot of new rules in terms of social interaction. You still have things like intimidate, you have skills like that, but there isn't like a separate system for interacting with people in the way that there is a system for fighting people. Other games have systems for this. For example, Burning Wheel has a whole system for debating people. It's similar to combat, in fact. There's a whole rule set, and there's skills that you can learn, and you actually go back and forth, and you can try and debate someone using a system. D&D still hasn't integrated in a system like that, which shows that it's still primarily a combat-focused system, and that's all right. And that's just the kind of system it is. But what is nice is they put some nice notes in here on role-playing. So there's a descriptive approach to role-playing where you simply say what your character does. And then you have an active approach to role-playing where you actually act it out and you put on voices and you maybe walk around the room or what have you. Resting, so recovering hit points is actually easier now than it is in 3rd edition, though I think it's harder than in 4th edition from what I've heard. But in any case, during a short rest, which is about an hour, you can look at all of your hit dice and you can roll as many of those hit dice as you like and regain that many hit points, adding your constitution to each of those rolls. And that uses up your hit dice, so to speak. You have like a pool of them. During a long rest, you can recover all of your hit points. And let's see again here. At the end of a long rest, a character regains all lost hit points. You also regain spent hit dice up to a number of dice equal to half of the character's total number of them. So you gain some of your hit dice back that you can again spend later during brief rests if you don't have a chance to have a full night's rest. So recovering damage is much easier. It's, of course, not terribly realistic, but, I mean, it's Dungeons & Dragons. The health system isn't terribly realistic, and I think everyone's okay with that. But this solves problems that you've run out of health potions, you're in the middle of the wilderness. You don't have to be almost dead and limp back to town. You can just rest, and you'll be pretty much set to go. Lifestyle expenses, downtime activities. There's rules for crafting, which is made pretty straightforward. You basically spend half of the amount of gold that it would take to the item that you're creating would cost, and then the amount of days that you spend making it is measured in increments of that gold. So it's a pretty simplified system. It's streamlined, not terribly complex, but it allows you to craft things in a consistent way. You can practice a profession, you can do research, you can do training. So this is interesting. There's a way to gain abilities in the game apart from experience. If you train, it costs 250 days and 1 gold piece per day. So it's expensive both in time and money. But if you go through it, then you learn a new language or gain proficiency with a new tool. So it's restricted. You're not leveling up your skills or your abilities or anything like that. But you do gain some advantages from training. If you're having a very long campaign and you just say, we rest in the city for a year, you can go through training, I suppose. All right, combat. Some big changes in combat. In combat, you now get to move, and you get 1 action. That's it. So going even beyond that, your movement can be interrupted by your action. So you can move and then do your action. You can do your action and then move. Or you can move, do your action, and then finish your move. So it can be broken up. As long as your total movement over the course of your turn doesn't exceed your movement, you're fine. Initiative's the same. You take 1 action. In some cases, you get a bonus action, and that allows you to get 1 bonus action. You can't ever get more than 1 bonus action. So at maximum, you'll be doing 2 actions and a move, but normally just 1 action and a move. You're allowed to describe narrative flourishes about what you're doing, but that doesn't have too much of an effect. You're able to interact with 1 object or feature for free. So that means you can draw a weapon, you can drop a weapon, you can pull a lever, you can do things like that just automatically. If you want to do more than that, you're going to have to spend your action. You also get 1 reaction per turn, which just allows you to respond to something. And this is often used in attacks of opportunity. And in other situations too. Like some spells rely on reactions, being able to react to other people doing stuff. And readying your character and setting up triggers. So for example, you could say, instead of taking my action, I'm going to spend my reaction and just say that when this thing happens in combat, then I'm going to respond to it like this. And so you can sort of set up triggers that will give an effect later on in the round if you don't want to do anything right now. And that would use up your reaction. Movement and position. A big change is actually rather subtle, but it's that grid movement and grids in general are now explicitly optional. So the game assumes that you'll be playing this without a grid, though the game certainly does support grid movement just fine, 5-foot steps and 5-foot blocks of movement. So it's definitely a change in focus to more on the theater of the mind rather than on grid-based combat. And again, that seems like much more of a throwback to earlier D&D that did not rely on a more miniatures based system. So much more focus on role-playing, much more focus on seeing the world and seeing the action and visualizing the sort of the frenetic cinematic activity just in your mind rather than laid out on a board in front of you. I tend to prefer my games that way anyway, and so it's, at least for me, it's nice to see that they're trying to do that, move in that direction. Difficult terrain, you can knock people over, creature size, attacking, attacking. So here we have our playing on a grid variant. It's explicitly called a variant though, which is a big change. We have attacks. Attacks are basically the same. You roll your dice, you roll your d20, you add your attack rating. It's going to be I should point this out. Melee attacks, as usual, require you add your strength, and that's you're going to strength to your d20, and that's going to be your attack roll. You're going to add your proficiency bonus if you're proficient in that weapon, and then you're trying to hit above an enemy's armor class, as usual. And then of course you're going to roll your damage, then add your strength to the damage. Right? This is about what you would expect. For ranged weapons, you're going to again roll your dexterity, add it to your d20, try and hit their armor class, roll your damage, but you're going to add your dexterity again is going to be added to the damage. Just like strength is added to melee attack damage, dexterity is going to be added to ranged attack damage. It keeps it consistent and easy to remember. And I think it's justifiable too. If you have greater dexterity, the increase in damage is that you're able to target body parts that do more damage. So I think that's the justification there. There are weapons that are finesse weapons, and those weapons use dexterity instead of strength. So that's built into it already. So in order to be like a character that wields knives, I suppose, or rapiers, you don't need to be a strength-based character. A rogue character who focuses on dexterity would do just fine with those. We have disengage. So if you're fighting another character, you want to move away without provoking an attack of opportunity, spend your action to take disengage, and you won't provoke opportunity attacks, and then you can move away. Dodging increases your dexterity saving throws later in the round. Help people hide, you can ready, already mentioned that. Search or use an object. Making an attack, ranged attacks, melee attacks. Two-weapon fighting. When you take the attack action and attack with a light melee weapon that you're holding in one hand, you can use a bonus action to attack with a different light weapon that you're holding in the other hand. So I suppose you're going to need to get bonus actions to do two-weapon fighting. You don't add your ability modifier to the damage of the second attack unless the modifier is negative. Grappling appears to be greatly simplified. You just add a grappling effect, which is listed near the end of the book. If you overcome you make an opposed check, basically. So there's no more of this combat maneuver defense and CMD and so on. It's just you make an opposed check where you use your strength athletics versus their strength athletics or dexterity acrobatics. And that's it for that. See if you grapple someone. You can take cover. Explains hit points. So we have damage rolls and we have critical hits. Critical hits are greatly simplified. As I keep pointing out, a lot of things in this edition are, and I like this simplification a lot. It's just you roll a 20, you get a critical hit. You roll a 1, you get a critical miss. That's it. There's no confirming. There's no other shenanigans. A 20 is critical, and a 1 is a miss. So when you roll a critical hit, all that happens is that you roll your damage dice again, add them to your first roll of damage dice, and then you add the modifier from your ability. So you just roll double damage dice. So it's fun, you definitely get to do extra damage, and it's easy to remember. For different damage types, damage resistance and vulnerability. If you resist a type of an attack, you take half damage. If you're vulnerable, you take double damage. Again, simple and straightforward. Easy to remember. We have new rules for death. If you drop to 0 hit points, then you will go unconscious. And once you're unconscious, you need to make death saving throws, which is just you need to get a 10 or higher. You don't get to add anything to it. At a 10 or a higher, then you get 1 success. If it's below that, then it's a failure. As soon as you get 3 successes, you go up to 1 hit point and you regain consciousness. If you get 3 failures, then you die. And there are things that can modify this. I'm sure clerics have ways to improve this. You can reduce a character to 0 hit points and just knock them out. Mounted combat, underwater combat. Spells, not a whole lot of new things here. We now have cantrips that can be cast at will as often as you want. They don't use any spell slots. So you can just keep doing those. You can have, you still have your components. It works essentially the same way as in previous editions. Although I may be missing some details. I haven't actually played a magic user. We have our schools of magic. It explains a little bit about how magic works in the D&D multiverse. And we have our list of spells. So they provide a complete list of spells here. Plenty of information. So if you're playing spellcasters and you just use basic D&D, you will be able to have plenty of options. We have conditions at the end of the book here. Blinded, charms. We have grappled, for example. If you succeed on grappling a character, his speed becomes 1, and he can't benefit from bonus to his speed. Yeah, it basically just stops him from moving. Rules for exhaustion, and that's basically it. All the core rules that you would need to know. We also have our, of course, our character sheet here at the end of the book. And I love this character sheet. I think it's just excellently laid out. It's basically, you only need 1 sheet. There's some extra stuff on the back if you want, and of course, a sheet for spells as well. Most characters are only going to need 1 sheet. It's just going to have your ability scores, your 6 saving throws, and your skills. And then you should put a little check there if you have proficiency, and then you would just add your proficiency bonus. Inspiration just tracks whether you have inspiration or not. You can write a passive wisdom number down here, so the game master can just check that to see if you can passively perceive problems that are happening around you. Armor class, initiative, speed, hit points. We have our little box here for our death saves, 3 successes or 3 failures. Languages, equipment, and of course up here, our personality traits, our ideals, our bonds, and our flaws, which are now prominently featured because they have a mechanical effect on the game. So, what do I think overall? Overall, I think this is an enormous improvement to the Pathfinder / 3.5 system. It simplifies a lot of things that were clunky. It streamlines and makes coherent and just consistent a lot of the rules that seem to sort of be all over the place. Where there's a lot of exceptions, there's a lot of different kinds of modifiers you would need to know about. There is different sections of your sheet that you would only use in certain situations. Now everything is just, you got your abilities, you got your skills, you got your proficiency bonus. And pretty much everything can be worked out just from knowing those. And by simplifying all of this makes the game a lot easier for the game master as well. Because he knows that this is for your basic abilities, this is for your sort of more specialized skills, and this is for when you're reacting to stuff. And just with that information, he can make calls on the go. A lot of the rules in the book are very common sense. Like grappling, for example, is just a contested roll using your strength and your athletics versus their acrobatics or their athletics, which is something that is common sense. Most people, as game masters, if they didn't know the rule for grappling, could make that up on the fly. And the game is very forgiving in that sense. It assumes that game masters are going to be making up rules or modifying the rules or just making their own calls, and the game's not going to break because of it. What you're going to need to do in any situation is going to be pretty intuitive and straightforward. And that's, I think, really what they were aiming for. This way, it makes the game much less reliant on knowing a lot of esoteric rules and much more just on role-playing and on knowing basically what your character can do and then just making common sense decisions from there. and then what's going to happen is just going to make sense. There are some things that could have a little bit more detail, I suppose, like advantage and disadvantage. You can either have it or not have it. For example, you can't have double advantage. If you have advantage and then another ability also gives you advantage, you just have plain old advantage. I mean, that could be house ruled easily, so that if you had double advantage, then you rolled 3 d20s and choose the highest one. So that could be house ruled. I see some people might be doing that. That's basically all I have to say about it. I really like how it's been modernized, how the creators of this edition have really looked at a lot of other modern RPGs, a lot of indie RPGs, and a lot of the advances that they've made in the genre in terms of solving RPG problems that have just plagued RPGs for a long time. And those have, a lot of them have been integrated. There's a lot of common sense put into this edition that was lost, I think, in other editions that became very cluttered, very nitpicky. In previous editions, there was a lot of just this giant salad of feats and bonuses and things that you had to track at every turn. In order to figure out how much damage you did, you'd have to know 4 or 5 different things and do this whole big pile of math before you could figure out what your roll was. And that slowed everything down. I expect this will be much faster and much easier for new players to get into, and easier to roleplay. People will pick it up and they won't have to reference a book constantly in order to know what to do. That'll give it a lot more flexibility, and you'll be able to play it in other genres very easily. Overall, I'm just very excited. I'm glad that they've made a lot of the improvements that they had, and I see this being one of the best editions of D&D that I've seen so far. I hope you enjoyed this review, and hope it was helpful to you. Please leave a comment if it was helpful, if you have any other input. If you think I was wrong about something, I mean, I don't know everything. I haven't played a lot of the other editions of D&D. So are there things that you didn't like about these new rules? Do you prefer I'm not sure what the right word is for it, I guess the increased crunch of the previous editions? Or do you prefer this more streamlined simplicity of this edition that kind of harkens back to the glory days of early D&D? Let me know, and thanks for watching. I'll see you guys again later.